Way back in 1936, when the world was in a pretty uncertain place, an archaeologist named V. Gordon Childe published this really revolutionary book, Man Makes Himself. His goal was pretty ambitious. He wanted to cut through all the noise of history to answer one of the most fundamental questions you can ask.
And that question is, have we as a species actually progressed? It sounds like such a simple question, right? But for centuries, the answer's been all tangled up in people's values and beliefs. Childe was like, nope, there has to be a way to answer this with cold, hard facts.
So to really get why this question got so tangled up, let's jump back in time to an era when everyone thought the answer was, well, a total no-brainer.
You can just feel the vibe of the 19th century in that quote, can't you? There was this incredible, widespread optimism. Progress wasn't just some vague hope. People thought it was practically a law of nature. Things were just constantly getting better, faster, and stronger, and there was absolutely no end in sight.
But that simple, almost naive belief, it was about to smash head-on into the brutal reality of the 20th century.
And yeah, rude shock is putting it mildly. You had devastating world wars, total economic collapse, and the rise of terrifying new technologies. It made people everywhere seriously question whether history was really the simple story of constant improvement. The whole idea of automatic progress was just shattered.
So this crisis of belief, it kind of split people into two camps. And as Childe argues, both of them were totally unscientific. On one side, you had the optimists, still clinging to that old idea of constant improvement. And on the other, you had the pessimists, who were convinced humanity had fallen from some past golden age and was now just going downhill.
And this, right here, gets to the absolute heart of the problem. See, Childe points out that just asking, have we progressed, isn't even a scientific question. And why is that? Because the answer completely depends on who you ask and what you value. For a military commander, a new submarine is definitely progress. But for the people in the city it's blockading, it's a weapon of terror. It's all subjective.
Okay, so if we want a real, objective, scientific answer, we have to completely change how we look at history. It's like we need to throw out the old lens and pick up a totally new one.
The history most of us learned in school was what you'd call political history. It's a big story about kings, famous battles, and elections. But Childe says, no, we should be looking at archaeological history. A history not about the powerful few, but about the everyday stuff, the tools and technologies that shaped how everybody actually lived and got by.
And for Childe, archaeology is so much more than just digging up dusty old pots. It's a science. It's about studying the tools, the actual instruments people used to make the things they needed. And if you study those tools, you can basically reverse engineer their entire economic and social system.
Okay, just think about this for a second. A simple stone axe. What does that tell you? Well, pretty much anyone can make one from local materials. That suggests a small group, pretty much self-sufficient. But a bronze axe? Whoa, that is a different world. You need specialists for that. You need miners, people who can smelt metal, smiths to forge it. You need trade networks to get copper and tin, which might come from hundreds of miles away. And most important, you need a food surplus to feed all those people who aren't farming. That one tool basically unpacks an entire economic system.
And here, this is that same exact idea, just on a much grander scale. This ancient Egyptian sailing ship isn't just a boat. It's a floating piece of evidence for a super complex Bronze Age society. Think about it. You needed lumberjacks, shipbuilders, weavers for the sails, sailors to run it. All of these people had to be organized and working together. And they were all being fed by a surplus of food grown by farmers. It's an entire economic world captured in one single object.
All right, so if we're going to look at history through this new archaeological lens, focusing on how people actually survived, what's our measuring stick? How do we objectively say this was a success?
And this is where Childe pulls out his masterstroke. He basically says, okay, let's stop judging ourselves by our own complicated, subjective human values, and let's judge ourselves by the same standard we'd use for any other animal on the planet, biology. And in biology, success is pretty simple, right? Did the species survive, and did it multiply? The clearest test for that is just, did its population go up over time?
All right, so let's actually put this wild idea to the test. Let's take a look at one of the biggest shakeups in all of human history, the Industrial Revolution in Great Britain, and let's see what happens when we apply this cold, hard biological standard.
So let's set the scene. It's 1570. Great Britain is still slowly recovering from the Black Death, and the population is sitting at around 4.1 million people.
Now, fast forward about 180 years. The number's gone up, sure, but not by a crazy amount. By 1750, right before the Industrial Revolution really kicks off, we're at about 6.5 million. So, steady growth, but nothing to write home about.
But then, in just the next 100 years, something absolutely mind-blowing happens. By 1851, the population explodes to over 27.5 million people. That's more than 4 times bigger in just a century. Incredible.
I mean, just look at that curve after 1750. It practically goes straight up. And look, Childe knows all about the horrors of the Industrial Revolution. We're talking child labor, the awful slums, disease. But he says if we're going to be objective scientists and stick to our biological yardstick, the conclusion is impossible to ignore. That new economic system, with all its terrible flaws, was, from a purely biological standpoint, a staggering success. It made it possible for the human species to survive and multiply on a gigantic scale in that part of the world.
And that, of course, leaves us with a really fascinating question to chew on. You see, Childe points to these massive revolutions in our history: the agricultural revolution, the urban revolution, the industrial one, and each time they completely changed how we lived and let our population just skyrocket. So the question for us today is this: if that biological success really is the measure of progress, what's next? What new way of organizing ourselves, of producing what we need, is going to spark humanity's next great revolution?